Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the rising crisis that is now being caused in the global economy by the war in Iran, and why this situation is now starting to look like a full-blown emergency. But before I get into all of that, can I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscriber button? It only takes you a second and really does help me with the algorithm. And don't forget, I'm also running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. Fun way of helping fund the channel. So scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below if you'd like to get involved in that. Now, over the weekend, we have seen a further escalation in this conflict. More countries are now being dragged into this war, and the situation is becoming more dangerous by the day. At the moment, we effectively have 5 countries actively involved in missile exchanges: the United States, Israel, Iran, Lebanon through Hezbollah, who are linked to Iran, and Yemen through the Houthis, who also have an affiliation. And that's just the direct involvement. On top of that, we've also got multiple countries who are having to defend themselves against drone and missile attacks on a daily basis. And they include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain. And the reason why those countries are important is because they are some of the biggest oil and gas producers in the world. So this is why it's having such a big impact on the global economy. And it's no longer just a regional issue that has no impact on your life. There are some very real global consequences that are happening right now. And at the same time as the war is continuing, it's also been reported that the United States now has deployed around 50,000 troops to the region, including Marines and ground forces. And there is growing speculation that the USA is preparing for a boots-on-the-ground offensive targeting Kark Island, which is an island just off the coast of Iran. And that's absolutely critical because Kark Island is effectively the economic heart of Iran. Around 90% of all of Iran's oil exports pass through that island. That basically they built that as their big refinery and export center. And that roughly accounts for around 30% of Iran's GDP. So the reason why the USA would want to take Kark Island is that it would basically give the USA a huge amount of leverage over the Iranian authorities to say, if you don't stop this war, then we're going to stop all of your income and close down your oil industry. Or the USA could do a similar thing to what it's done in Venezuela, where it basically takes control of all of that oil. But either way, it would be seriously bad news for Iran, but it would represent a huge escalation in the war. So if the infrastructure in Kark Island is taken offline, we're talking about military escalation and also a direct hit to the Iranian economy at its core. Now let's talk about what all of this means for the global economy, because this is where things start to get really serious and why I think this is already an emergency. One of the biggest concerns right now is the disruption to key shipping routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is controlling, and the Bab el-Mandab, which is down by Yemen, which leads through to the Suez Canal. And that's basically the Houthis in Yemen basically have control over that. And these are two of the most important energy choke points in the world. And right now, traffic through these routes is severely disrupted. And as a result, we are seeing a massive reduction in global oil supplies. It's estimated that around 18 million barrels per day has effectively been taken out of the system as a result of the fact that tankers can't pass through that waterway. Yet some of that has been offset by emergency measures like the release of strategic reserves. But those have only added back around 7 million barrels per day. So overall, the global economy is now short by around 11 million barrels per day. And to put that into context, the world uses around 100 million barrels per day. So we're talking about a loss of more than 10% in the global supply. That is absolutely huge. And also, when you take into account that those reserves that are being released, that won't last forever. That's just an emergency measure for the short term. At some point, those reserves will run dry, and then we would potentially face a shortage of 18 million barrels per day. So as a result of this, oil prices have now surged above $115 per barrel. Now, we've only really seen those levels once before in recent years, and that was immediately after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But that spike was very short-lived. Prices came back down very quickly. This time, we're already into week 5 of this conflict and prices are staying elevated. In fact, they're going up. And if this continues, we could be looking at oil heading towards $150 or even $200 per barrel. And that sounds ludicrous, but actually we're not that far away from this point. And this is where this becomes a major problem. And this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump has lifted the sanctions on Russian oil that's at sea. He's also lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil, the first time since 1979. And also now it's been reported that he's allowing oil to go from Russia to Cuba. So all of the oil sanctions are being lifted. And why is that happening? Because the global economy is desperately short. And oil doesn't just affect gasoline and petrol prices, it feeds into everything. Transport costs, electricity costs, manufacturing costs, logistic costs, raw material costs. Oil is the foundation of the global economy. We are all moving towards renewable energy, but as it stands today, oil is still the heartbeat of the global economy. So when oil prices rise, everything becomes more expensive. And that feeds directly into everybody's favourite topic, inflation. But it doesn't stop there, because we're now seeing knock-on effects across multiple industries. We're hearing about shortages of ammonium nitrate, which is a key component in fertiliser, and that means higher costs for farmers, which ultimately means higher food prices. So this is where it starts hurting everybody, because we all have to buy food. We're also seeing concerns about helium shortages, and whilst you might be worried about balloons for your next party, it's actually critical for semiconductor production. And semiconductors are now used in everything from cars to phones to artificial intelligence systems. So any disruption there has huge implications for the global tech industry. On top of that, there are now risks to aluminium production in the Middle East, and aluminium is used across construction, transport, packaging, aerospace. Pretty much everything uses aluminium these days. So what we're now seeing here is not just one issue. This is a chain reaction that's starting to explode. Every single day we're hearing about a new problem emerging in a different part of the global economy. This is no longer just about oil and gas. This is turning into a broad-based economic shock. Now the big question is, when is this going to end? Well, right now, there's no clear answer to that question. We're hearing messages from people like Donald Trump suggesting that the war is close to being resolved, that the US has achieved most of its objectives, and that Iran is under extreme pressure and is desperate to do a deal. But when you look at what's actually happening on the ground, that really doesn't line up. Troop numbers are increasing, particularly from the USA. Military activity is intensifying, and there is now talk of potential ground offensives. At the same time, Iran has shown no willingness to agree to a deal. They've rejected the USA's proposals and made it clear that they won't negotiate under pressure. And fundamentally, the current regime is not going to agree to terms that would remove them from power, because that's what this ultimately comes down to. The USA and its allies are not looking to simply return to the previous status quo situation. They want guarantees on nuclear weapons, reductions in military capability, and potentially a change in leadership in Iran. And from Iran's point of view, that's simply not going to be acceptable. So we've got a deadlock. One side pushing for major change, the other side refusing to concede. And in that kind of situation, conflicts don't end quickly. They drag on, they escalate, and they cause increasing damage over time. Now, in terms of the economic impact, we've already seen disruption, but most of this has not yet fully fed through into the official data. We're going to start seeing that impact coming through in the March numbers, and then much more clearly in April and May. Initially, that will show up as a slowdown in growth. But if this continues, there is a very real risk that this turns into a full-blown global recession. We're not just talking about something minor here. This has the potential to be as serious as the oil crisis in the 1970s or the global financial crisis in 2007-2008. Because when you combine high energy prices, supply chain disruption, rising inflation, and falling demand, you create the perfect conditions for a major downturn. And that's why I'm calling this an emergency. Because this is no longer just a geopolitical story, something fun for me to talk about and for you to listen to. This is now a global economic crisis in the making. So the overall summary of today's video is that the war in Iran is continuing to escalate. More countries are becoming involved, and this is now having a significant and growing impact on the global economy. We're seeing major disruption to oil supply and gas supplies, sharp increase in prices, and emerging shortages across multiple sectors. And as things stand right now, there is no clear end in sight, which means the risks to the global economy for the rest of 2026 are continuing to rise. So I'll keep you posted on any further significant news and developments as and when they occur. Hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. I'm trying to get you thinking in different ways. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. This is for a limited time. So if you'd like to get involved, then please scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below. Hopefully it's a bit of fun, and it's all been done by an independent company, so I'm not picking the winner. It will be done independently. Thank you also to everybody that continues to support me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, I really appreciate that support. It really does help to keep me motivated and thinking up more ideas for videos to share with you. And here's something to put a smile on your face.